71.9.
Okay, so 271.9 in the Alter Rebbe Hilchos Shabbos. No, wait 1 second while all righty.
Okay, I'm at the pulling out of the car dealership. I had to get a state inspection and oil change, so I'll be driving.
Sounds good.
Sorry, last night my battery died, and I charged up enough to text you back to let you know.
Yeah, well, it was good timing because we were just wrapping up actually. So your battery has a very good sense of timing.
Sure,
it's like a Yakisha battery or something.
Right.
Okay. So we are at Seif 9. Asur chacham litain klum afilu mayim mishigiyaz man kiddush ad sheikadish. Hainu mishihigia bein hashmashish iniskadish hayei misafik. So the sages prohibited to taste anything, even water. From once kiddush has arrived, the time of kiddush has arrived, meaning when it becomes the time of bein hashmashis, which means between the suns, which this is at this time, this is a time that it's not clear if it's day or if it's night. Even though like Hasidus explains that it's not day and it's not night. It's definitely, there's a point where it becomes night and there's a point where it's day. And like Hasidus explains, there's nothing in between them. The point in between day and night is a non-existent point because it's either day or it's night at any given instant. However, there's a time that we don't know if it's day or night, and this is called bein hashmashis. So meaning it's a doubt: is it Shabbos yet, or is it not Shabbos yet? So once this time has arrived, now remember, unlike with some other things where you would have to wait until after bein hashmashis, meaning your obligation would start at the beginning of bein hashmashis, in theory. But you wouldn't be able to do anything about it until after bein hashmashis. In the case of Shabbos, you can take Shabbos early. So making kiddush, you don't have to necessarily wait till the end of bein hashmashis. But in either case, you're not allowed to taste anything from the time the bein hashmashis begins until until you made kiddush, or even during the day, if you davened Ma'ariv still in the day, meaning you've now accepted Shabbos early. So for you it's Shabbos, even though for the time of Shabbos has not arrived, but for you it's Shabbos. Also, same thing. Once you accept Shabbos, you do not taste anything, eat or even drink water until you make Kiddush. Even though other mitzvahs that have a set time, so they did not prohibit, besides for actually making a meal from once the time comes, mishum gzeira shemi yimoshich basauda, because there's because they made a like a decree or something like this, an ordinance, that they're worried about maybe you will drag on the time of the meal. V'yavar azman, the time will pass and you won't be able to do the mitzvah anymore. But in those cases, tasting is allowed. Because when you're just tasting something, how long are you going to be tasting? A good example of this would be, for example, even though it's different because it's not a Torah obligation, it's a sage's obligation, but the lighting of the menorah on Hanukkah, that, as you know, you're allowed to have a snack before you've lit menorah, but you're not supposed to have a meal before you light menorah. However, by Kiddush and Havdalah, they were more stringent about this. Why? Because the main part of the mitzvah, in other words, the proper way to fulfill this obligation, is at the beginning of the time. Meaning you are receiving Shabbos in. You are what do you call it? Being malavish Shabbos. You're accompanying Shabbos out. So you do this as close to that as possible. by these mitzvahs. Dahainu samach l'knisa Shabbos v'samach l'tziyasei. So this meaning that close to it, it's coming in and close to it's going out. V'afilu im hischel lechel v'lishtes mi'ba'ediyim tzorich lahafsik hishiyageh ben hashmashis. And even if you are already eating and drinking from the day, you started a meal during the day. Now, really, you're not supposed to really start a meal on Friday after a certain time, but this is really not. It's not the meikar halacha. It's not the. It's better not to start a meal after a certain time, but it's not like a direct prohibition. So let's say you started a you were feeling naughty that day, and you started a full meal on Friday afternoon. And so in this case, when the time of bein hashmashis comes, you must stop the meal. You have to stop what you're doing, stop eating and drinking. And even though by other mitzvahs, even Torah mitzvahs, if you started in a way, in a permissible way, meaning before the obligation of the other mitzvah started, you don't have to stop. Obviously, this is talking about positive mitzvahs. It's not talking about if you started eating beheter on Erev Yom Kippur, you can continue eating into Yom Kippur. So we're not talking about negative commandments, we're talking about positive commandments. And that by when another positive commandment, when the time comes, as long as you started before that obligation began, you don't have to stop usually. So for this reason, you don't have to stop when it comes time for there's a time, the earliest time and the latest time that you can say Kriya Shema, right? Or Tdaven. And when this, let's say you were eating or drinking, when this time arrived, you do not have to stop and say everything you're doing and say Kriya Shema. I mean, obviously, if you're close to the end of the time, you better stop, because if the time has to that mitzvah, but the time you don't have to stop if you're eating a meal in that thing. Why? Because you started it before the obligation began. However, when it comes to kiddush, right, and then we're talking about kiddush on Friday night. They did not allow you to finish your meal and then make kiddush after that. Because the main obligation of kiddush was fixed to be in a place of a meal of Shabbos, and before it, and not after the meal. It's supposed to be attached to a meal and preceding that meal, preceding said meal. And not after it. Like it says, you should call Shabbos einig, you should call Shabbos pleasure. And the sages, they how do you say darshu? They were they expounded on it. Is that a good word for it? The hainu b'makim sheis anig sham b'suda Shabbos sham te'kriyas hakrisim b'fanah. That in the place where you're having your einig Shabbos, in the place where you're having your enjoyment of Shabbos, meaning when you're having your enjoyment in the Shabbos meal, that is where you should have the kiddush immediately preceding. Mikol makim. Still, ein loy lahafsik sudasi legambri ulevarach b'chsamazin. He should not stop his meal completely and bench after it. Mitam she is ba'ed, from the reason that's explained. And I'm guessing there'll be a note there. But rather he should make kiddush right away, meaning you're making a meal, you're eating mamish bread. So rather than benching on the bread, stop where you are. The time came, make kiddush, and then finish your meal, and then bench afterwards. And that way, the kiddush is immediately preceding the part of the meal that's right after it, even though part of the meal was before it, but at that time you didn't have an obligation to make kiddush. So you make kiddush and then continue the meal and then bench, and the kiddush will be preceding that continuation of the meal. So that is test inside, and now over to the notes department.
All right, so we're gonna go to the big gimel. So where it says, and even if one began to eat and drink while it is still on Friday, he has to stop when Ben Hashmashis arrives. He brings up that this is from Psachim, Maseches Psachim, and in the Kuchas Achron, like we said, the later supplementary notes, the Alter Rebbe, where he changed certain things afterwards, second 2.0, so to speak. The Alter Rebbe focuses on the ruling in the main text that Friday afternoon you have to stop eating immediately at the onset of Ben Hashmashis, at the beginning of sunset. Although there are authorities who rule that you can continue eating until nightfall, Seisak Echavim, when the stars come out, the Alter Rebbe follows the more stringent view, citing many Rishonim who rule in this way. The Alter Rebbe does, however, maintain that with regards to Havdalah, there's greater halachic support for the views that enable one to continue eating until Seis. On that basis, he maintains that those who begin the third Shabbos meal during Ben Hashmashis on Saturday evening do not need to be admonished. So to wash during Ben Hashmashis.
Yeah. Right, which is interesting.
And there's actually there's stories of such.
Don't do it, I don't think, right?
Well,
generally we try to be makbid to.
Yeah.
I mean,
so it's still
we don't wash at all by the third.
The language is not, and because of that, go ahead and do it. The language is, if you see those who do it, you don't need to admonish them. You don't need to be, hey, you're doing the wrong thing,
right?
Because they have on what to rely. It's very different than saying, go ahead and do it. But I will say, it's very interesting because it was seen several times in 770. And these decisions were not made by random people in 770, by Fabrengans, but by people who have the wide shoulders to carry such things, and who told people, yeah, go wash, where it was before Tzeis and maybe even later, I don't know, but that's a different story.
Yeah, no, but which is interesting. Which is interesting considering that generally we don't wash at all.
There are many places, but yeah. Right, but it's not I meant to say.
Wait a minute. Did you say Chabad doesn't hold by washing for Shalosh Yudas?
In Chabad, the general, not we don't hold by it. The general minhag in Chabad is that we do not wash by Shalosh Yudas, and rather it's a time for delving into words of Torah, specifically in the Torah.
All right. No, the reason why bringing Irv Rifkin back up again in case of Torah. I used to go there for Menkamar with Shabbos, and I thought because it was Rabbi Rosenblum Senior Shul, right, Mendel? And
correct,
was the rabbi.
And apparently they washed for.
Well, it should be noted. It should be noted that Keser Torah.
Yeah.
Right. Even though the rabbi was and still is, in other words, Rabbi Rosenblum Senior then, Rabbi Rosenblum Junior now, and both, and then now many Lubavitchers go there. Then some Lubavitchers went there. At the same time, Keser Torah is not a shul that follows Chabad minhag. In other words, it's not a Chabad shul, and even though they do follow some Chabad minhagim. But they're not a Chabad shul, and therefore they would go by I don't know exactly. I know the davening is inspired, but whatever minhagim they have, that's A. B. In other words, if a Lubavitcher washes by Shalosh Yudas, I don't think it's a big just even though minhag Chabad is that we don't do it. I'll give you an example. My brother-in-law is a Bobover. In Bobov, they wash for Shalosh Yudas.
Yeah.
So when I'm by him and he goes after mincha, he goes and washes for Shalosh Yudas. I join him.
Is that with the white? Is that with the White Sox?
No, that's
with the well, it depends. Sometimes sometimes the White Sox, but more often in Bobov nowadays it's with regular long pants.
Okay. Another question
with the Streimel and all that, but there's many such groups, and they all have different, each with their own minhagim based on what was passed down by their Rebbes, etc.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that about.
Ira, I think to clarify further, though, your answer is just to fully bottom line for both your benefit and anyone else who could be watching this and will be watching this later. Is bottom line, it's not the Lubavitch is against washing for Amaitzi. On the contrary, it's Halachik Inyan. We're going to talk about it later. There's the concept there should be a third meal but it's just not something that Lubavitch necessarily washes for, even though there are many times the Hayom brings up that one should wash at that time to Fabreng, special Shabbos occasions, such as Shabbos Mevarchim or Shabbos before certain occasions, that one should wash in Fabreng. Specifically, and there were occasions where the Rebbe came at said times with only challah and washed, not even with other foods of su'uda, not even salt with which to dip the said challah in. The Rebbe came with lechem mishnah and dipped the challah in itself. So there's definitely Lubavitch is we're going to say pro washing. It's just not necessarily something Lubavitch takes part of in that way, because the focus is more on the spiritual sustenance of Teres Achsidus, like Mendel brought before, and there's a whole learning into that. We'll get into that more when we learn about Shalashudis. It's a whole discussion, but I just want to make that clear. There are many Lubavitch shows, I'm sure, that have challah available and say go ahead, wash, but exactly why Lubavitch doesn't take part in that is a discussion.
Right, that's for a different podcast.
Yeah. Another quick question: I didn't know Keser Torah still existed. Where do they daven now, Keser Torah?
They daven in the different places. They daven during the big minyanim in the JCC, and during like Mincha, Ma'ariv, stuff like that. I think in the Baal Shem Tov Shul.
What about Shabbos? What about Shabbos Day? Shabbos Day. What are they?
No, that's what he's talking about. They don't daven during the week.
In the JCC, they don't have weekday minyanim. They only have Shabbos minyanim. So Shabbos Day, they daven in the JCC, like the building that's right behind the post office. And
the old building,
the building behind the post office, that's where they daven.
Okay.
That's by the JCC, that building of the JCC, and
so they
Mincha Ma'ariv they daven at Baal Shem Tov Shul.
I'm pretty sure they started davening Mincha Ma'ariv at the JCC as well.
Could be. It could be. For a while they were doing.
I think they moved Mincha Ma'ariv back into the JCC. Their emails.
And anyhow, we'll figure that out in the non-halachic portion of
the shul where you and I sang Yechi.
That's
is history.
You're taught that building is still there. Hillel remodeled it, and it is now classrooms or something like that. I've never been in there. I don't know. Anyways, on with the halachis.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can talk about Keser Torah another time. Yeah, let's stay focused on our halachis here. So they don't need to be admonished if they wash late, if they wash ben hashmashos. Now, moving forward to the next note number 40. Basically, so we say, so for this reason, it's not necessary at the meal for you have to stop that you would have to stop eating. So we said other mitzvahs of Deiraisa, if you began eating, you're allowed to continue, because the time even before the time of the mitzvah arrives, so you don't have to interrupt your meal. So for this reason, you don't have to stop eating when the time for Shema or Shemana Esrei arrives. You don't have to, like at the beginning of that time arrives, you don't have to stop right away to do that. And you should see back in Siman Ayin in section 70, subsection 5, regards to saying Shema, and section 89.6, regard to saying the morning Shemana Esrei. So that's where you see this from. And the sections that deal with the afternoon and evening services are not extant in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. And so you see the Alter Rebbe, you should see the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Kairei, section 232, subsection 2, and 235, subsection 2 for the relevant laws. But obviously, one has to stop eating to recite Shema Shemana Esrei before those times of their recitation passes. But the Alter Rebbe is saying is that you don't need to interrupt at the beginning of those times, upon the commencement of the time for the recitation. Which this brings up the whole thing of when in the Haggadah, when they come to tell their rabbis, hey, the time to say Shema arrives, there's one of the commentaries says, wait a second, you have to realize the extremity of how long they were fabranging with Haggadah Shel Pesach and the story of Pesach. It couldn't have been at the beginning of said time, because they wouldn't have been so rude to interrupt Torah learning, especially by their teachers at the beginning of said time, because they still have a couple hours. So that means they fabrang all the way till Sof Zman Kriyas Shema.
Right.
Till like 9:30.
Where it falls there, but it's like 8:30, 9 o'clock, something, whatever. Like
8:30, maybe even 9:30 a.m. depending. Maybe they're going about the Alter Rebbe and the Gra. It's pretty wild. Anyway, so now the next note. Let me just see. I'm sorry.
By the way, that reminds me of the time that we were learning the Maim of Atat Tzava, and really going deep into it, discussing it. What's it called? And then we had to stop when they do it. This was we started at about 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. And then we had to stop when they told us the guys, you got to move over. The 8:15 chakras is about to start.
There you go. So then moving on to the next what you had asked before, it says the Alter Rebbe said should not interrupt your meal to say benching, for the reason to be explained. It doesn't explain it in the Nez. We'll see soon in Sif Yud Beis and the Kuchas Achron there, I think. So, yeah, all right, Yud.
Okay. Seif Yud. The tzarich lifrei samapa ala shulchan lechasis apas, and one must put a cloth on the table to cover the bread, kedem shi kaddish, before he makes kiddush. Va'achar kach yisirena, and after this he removes it. Kedei shetisra apas ki'ilu hu ba'at ala shulchan l'chved Shabbos she's gonna be kiddush, like as if he now just brought it on the table. I mean, you uncover it, like similar to how, like as if you brought it now on the table in honor of Shabbos that he just mentioned in Kiddush. And I'm hoping the notes will get into the different few of the. I mean, we were over this when we were in Mishnah Brura, the idea of the different reasons. Some is the embarrassment of the bread, which means you would have to do it. You would have to do it by both. This is by both the day and night applies. Then you have Yikar the Shabbos, which the honor of Shabbos, but that's only by the night meal applies to that reasoning. Then you also have the mun, that the mun had a. What's interesting is here he doesn't mention underneath it, because according to the reason of mun, you would have a cloth underneath it and a cloth below it, right? And additionally, according to that reason, you wouldn't remove it when you say hamaitzi. Rather, you would say hamaitzi with it still under the cloth, which actually I've seen some people do, by the way. In Chabad, you don't really see that as much. By other Chassidus and maybe in the Welt at large, I don't know, but you actually see it where they make the hamaitzi with it still under the dakel. Anyhow, notes.
Yes, there's only pretty much 2 notes. One is just stressing the fact that it says before making kiddush, just pointing out that it doesn't have to be. We're not talking about after Ma'ariv B'davka, because you could be making kiddush before Ma'ariv. So, I don't know why he feels the need to stress that, but he does. But then the next note is the fact that
maybe he's pointing at the reason of busha because meaning he's connecting it with having the wine on the table, and therefore being that the challah has a bracha that's more that's usually higher up in the hierarchy, so you cover the challah, so it shouldn't be embarrassed that you're saying the other bracha first. That would seem to go in line with that reasoning. Is that meaning it has nothing to do with Ma'ariv? What's it called? It has to do with you have the wine.
Why would I
think?
Front of it. I get what I'm saying is based on how this halach is being worded. Why would I think it has to do anything with Ma'ariv that he needs to come and negate that? I didn't think it had anything to do.
I don't know because he doesn't say it specifically. He doesn't in the actual text. He doesn't connect it to the wine. He just says before you make kiddush. So how long before you make kiddush?
Yeah, but
so being that the reasoning perhaps that he's going by here is the embarrassment of the wine of the bread in front of the wine. So he's pointing out that you don't need it. Kedem shi kaddish means immediately kedem shi kaddish, as opposed to.
I guess I still don't understand why
he feels the need. Why would we have to think that?
Who cares? Whenever I'm about to make kiddush, I need to make sure the challah is covered. Before Ma'ariv, after Ma'ariv, what this is, I don't know. Like, yeah.
Did you say you cover the challah when you're making kiddush, right?
Yes, you need to cover the challah before you make kiddush. Now this comes from Psachim.
Mendel, you do not cover the challah when you make
kiddush?
Yeah,
we cover the challah. We cover the challah. Okay. My point was there's different things based on what the reasoning is. And some people they do not uncover the challah when they make hamaitzi with the challah still under. And
I've seen
there are those.
I don't do
that. Brought up the different reasons, and based on different reasons, like Mendel's saying, some will remove the cover right after they make kiddush. That it only needs to be covered. It's just about covering it during kiddush time while you're making the blessing of kiddush. And others are saying no, it should be covered all the way until you make the bracha of hamaitzi, because there's different reasons. But anyway, so the The
So,
next note I'll
there's
say
no
is
halacha on that. There's no halacha on that.
it's different.
There's no.
There is
It's
a
all
halacha on
part
that.
of the general category of halacha. There's different practices in this halacha. It's called minhag, and this is different minhagim based on these different reasons. Like Mendel, that's what Mendel was saying before, is that some, and like what I just said, is that some people's minhag is to take it off right after Kiddush. Some people is to leave it on until they're about to make the bracha hamaitzi. They'll take it off right before they make the bracha hamaitzi. And some even keep it on for the bracha of hamaitzi and only take it off after they make the bracha when they're ready to cut it. And then there's the one time a year, and then there's the time of year where we leave it in for the bracha, and we even break the matzah in the cover, which is the matzah, and on Pesach we break the middle matzah inside the cover, is Lubavitch minhag, but that's for a different reason. But anyway, moving along.
Right. What's interesting here is that the Alter Rebbe does not mention, where at least not here yet, maybe he does later, the covering of other foods, which just by all these things, it very much seems like the Alter Rebbe is leaning into, at least from what's it looks here, he's leaning into the reasoning of not embarrassing the bread, because he doesn't say to cover put the cloth underneath it, which that comes from the reason of Zeichel Aman. And he doesn't mention the covering of any other foods, which would come from Yikar de Shabbos. So in other words,
and not only that,
it seems that his reasoning goes on the embarrassment of the bread in front of the wine.
Say not only that, but the Alter Rebbe's wording is also ba'achar kach, meaning after Kiddush.
Cover it, right?
Hoidim she'yikadesh. Ba'achar kach, meaning after Kiddush. He doesn't say, and then when you get up to the bracha of hamaitzi yisirena, right, or after you make hamaitzi yisirena, he says achar kach, meaning after Kiddush, meaning right after Kiddush you can take the cover off. Yeah, and one thing was interesting. So
that for sure it looks like he doesn't necessarily go by the reasoning of Mun. Yeah,
but we're jumping ahead a little bit. Just first.
Yeah, it could be addressed later.
Okay, but first we're just jumping ahead about the first. Just covering the bread comes from Psachim. This is the source for the expression "Poires mapa umakadesh." Spread out a cloth and recite Kiddush. Comes from Psachim, and later in section 299. Subsection 14 will mention the bread should be covered when a bracha is being recited over wine, so the shame will not be seen. So I think over there is when he's going to get into the reasons of why and those variations. Right now he's just mentioning, because this is more about Kiddush. This is not the halachas of the challah and lechem mishnah. This is more about the halachas of making Kiddush. So during Kiddush needs to be covered. All that must be covered, however, are the 2 loaves required for lechem mishnah. Pieces of bread that are on the table need not be covered. That's a very interesting distinction, because there are many minhagim that I've seen in Lubavitch where all pieces of bread and all hamaitzi is to be covered. So and you have even crackers.
Well, not just all bread. There's even people who because of the Shabbos reason, either keep food other food off the table or cover all food on the table. But
you're saying things
in the
that aren't
Mishnah
even
Berurah,
hamaitzi, that aren't even considered.
Which I guess we hold by. The Mishnah Berurah brought an opinion like that. Is that not only pieces of bread, but only the challah before the balabais has to be covered. If you have rules for other people, I mean, unless let's say they're making their own kiddush, then maybe their one would also be covered.
But unless you're actually making kiddush,
your lechem mishnah, your challah doesn't have to be covered at all.
Yeah, but even what you just said, if they're making their own kiddush, then it has to be covered for their kiddush. Doesn't have to be covered for my kiddush.
Right. So that's my point. I'm saying. No, he didn't particularly mention that. In the Mishnah Berurah, it was assuming there's only the balabais is making kiddush. It was that scenario. So I'm saying if somebody else is making kiddush, fine, so maybe it'd cover his. But he brings an opinion there, which it looks like the Alter Rebbe follows here, that only or at least the note. I'm not sure where's the source of the note, because he doesn't say.
Yeah, see, that's what I don't know, and that's why I'm curious, and I think we're going to get to that later.
Unless he brings it, he's bringing it from the later.
I think we'll have to see that in Reish Tzadik test, because like I said, what I've seen, and by Lubavitch or Shoals and by Lubavitch or Rabbi saying, go cover all the mezainis, go cover anything that could be considered Kiddush Makim.
Right, even mezainis,
should be covered. So,
I've seen people cover all the crackers, even. Yeah.
So I said even crackers and cookies, even dessert type items that are
right. And you can't even say it's mitzad Yikar de Shabbos, because Yikar de Shabbos only applies at night. So when they're covering the crackers by the kids during the day, so you can't even say that it's because let's cover all the foods or whatever, Yeah.
So moving on. Yud Aleph. That's it. That's all he has. I think he's going to get into all the other things we brought up when we're talking about challah, but right now we're
when
talking
we
about
get
kiddush,
there, yeah.
yeah.
Vein tzarich levarich beiri pri agafen al keshel kiddush zeh im kvar beirich al yayin b'seudah zu. So we're now jumping back to what we were saying in 9, right? Which I guess what's it called? I guess that's why he brought up Yud, because he's saying that you should put the when you reach the point of kiddush. Remember, you've already been eating now, so it looks like this is maybe perhaps all continuing. That's why he only brought up this little part of it as opposed to the whole thing. He's talking about you were eating a seudah before, so you don't have to make a beir pri agafen on this wine if you already made a beir pri agafen in this meal. Let's say remember Friday afternoon you started eating a meal, right? And you already made a hagafen during this meal. So you do not need to make another beir pri agafen. Because also the wine of this kiddush you already were how do you call it, like fulfilled its obligation or whatever during when you made the bracha of hagafen before. And also on wine that he's going to drink afterwards during the meal, he would also not make another bracha from this same reason, is that it was already included in the bracha that you made before of beir pri agafen. I guess he's going with the assumption that you had in mind all wine you're going to drink, or if it was there, so therefore automatically any wine that's available you have intention on, because there is a matter sometimes.
It's all part of the same meal. You're just stopping to make kiddush, but it's all the same meal.
Right. No, but for example, there's a whole question, which I guess we'll get to later in the Siman, of like if your wine spilled, then what? Because if you had other in mind that you're going to drink wine bichlal, again, we'll see what the Rebbe says on that. I'm going back to Mishnah Berurah and that, where there's the whole question of what was your intention, if your intention was to drink wine bichlal or whatever it is. Anyways.
We're saying though that he was drinking wine in the meal, so
right. So meaning
he had the intention to drink wine in the meal.
So you
made a beir pri agafen on wine during the meal.
Which would actually be different than kiddush. It would actually be different than kiddush, because by kiddush there could be the possibility what if I only had in mind this cup that I'm holding in front of me. When you're eating a seudah and you make a hagafen, mistami, you're having in mind any wine that you're going to drink.
That shows he is drinking wine during this meal. So
right. V'chein im mekadosh ala pas. And so too, if you're making kiddush on bread, let's say you don't have wine, and you're going to be making kiddush on bread, ein tzarich levarich ala hamaitzi. So you already had a maitzi at the beginning of the meal, and you had in mind already to whatever bread you're going to eat during this meal. So now it comes the time of kiddush. So you would not make a hamaitzi because you already made a hamaitzi. You start in the bracha of kiddush, right? Asher kiddushan mitzvaysav ratzabanav Shabbos kache, etc. Mekadosh Shabbos. Aval im kiddush ala case. However, if you made kiddush on if you did have wine and you made kiddush on a cup, right? Meaning let's say. It doesn't make a difference whether you weren't drinking wine before, and you had to make a hagafen, or you were drinking wine before and you didn't have to make a hagafen, but you took a cup of wine and you said that right?
Wine.
So on the wine, if you were drinking wine before, you don't have to make a hagafen. If you weren't drinking wine before, you have to. However, now for the hamaitzi, meaning you're not making the kiddush on the hamaitzi, you're making it on wine. You have to make a bracha hamaitzi.
Right. And
why? Because the time he's making kiddush, right? It became basically prohibited for him until he's done kiddush to eat challah. Because you can't. Well, I guess he's saying just it's physically impossible to say the kiddush and to eat at the same time. He never met my cousin, but anyways, but you can't eat and talk at the same time. So therefore,
the kiddush is a hefsek.
Right. So automatically you had to you removed your intent from eating challah. So now you have to make another hamaitzi. Now, so why don't you have to make another Beri Pia Guffin? Or in the case where the Kiddush is on, because you're making that bracha before Kiddush, not after Kiddush. In this case, by the Hamaitzi, when you made the Kiddush on the wine, whether you have to say a Guffin or not, the Hamaitzi comes after the Kiddush, not before it. So
No,
therefore,
but we're talking about if he made Hamaitzi before making Kiddush on the wine.
right. No, correct.
The fact is that this interrupts that Hamaitzi.
My point is that like this, is that beforehand, let's say I'm only making, let's say I don't have wine. So I don't have to make Hamaitzi again, because I already made Hamaitzi, and now when I'm making Kiddush, that Kiddush comes after the bracha of Hamaitzi, so it's connected to the Hamaitzi. So it's not a Hesra Das, it's not a lapse of thought.
Either way, it's coming after. I think your wording is throwing it off and could lead to confusion, because you're saying it comes after. Hello, yeah, even the other one would also come after
because
the
your Hamaitzi is now not part of the Kiddush, it's rather coming after the Kiddush.
So that's
therefore the Kiddush is a hefsek.
In one of them, the Hamaitzi carries through. In the other one, there's this thing that interrupts the Hamaitzi.
Right. So why does it carry through in the
Kiddush
first case?
The wine.
The reason it carries through in the first case is because the Hamaitzi is the Kiddush.
Yes.
That's the only reason it carries through. So therefore, it's not a hefsek because it's connected to the Hamaitzi. Whereas now you made Kiddush and then you're going to go have Bikaveh Suda. It's a separate thing. You made a hefsek. That's the difference.
But you're by saying it that way, it's making it very confusing because you work Kaveh Suda before the Kiddush also.
Complain to the Mishnah Brura who explains that that's how that's
No, I'm saying I think you're saying it wrong. You're saying it in a way.
I'm not. I'm saying it the right.
You keep saying it before and after when it's not true. He made Hamaitzi before.
It is before and after.
And he's he's sitting in the same Suda.
In other words, what point do you make Hamaitzi? If I'm making Kiddush on bread
before.
That's the reason. Before. That's the reason.
What point? He made Hamaitzi before.
It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference.
The difference is that in one case,
it was not connected to Kiddush. That Hamaitzi was not connected to Kiddush.
That's the Nakuda. It's not about before or after. It's not about Kaveh Suda before or after.
It is because now that you made Kiddush on wine, you disconnected it.
It was a horse. It was a mule.
It's about the disconnection.
It's okay. If it's about disconnection, it's about connection also. You can't have something be about disconnection and not be about connection.
You can't say that he wasn't Kaveh Suda beforehand.
He's right.
No, that's not the point. It's fine. You're Kaveh Suda, but the Hamaitzi that you're going to make, you cut it off now because it's not part of your Kiddush. So Kiddush is now a hefsek. When you're making Kiddush on wine, it's a hefsek. On the other hand, when you're making the Kiddush on the self-same bread, then it's not a hefsek because the Kiddush is on the bread. It's connected to the bread. And therefore, it's not a hefsek. How can you have a hefsek when your Kiddush is on the bread itself? That's the point. On the other hand, you made the Kiddush on the wine, so the Kiddush on wine is a disconnection between bread and bread. Whereas in this case, there's a continuation because the Kiddush itself is on the bread, and therefore Kiddush is not an interruption because it's on the bread. That's the point.
Exactly.
Fine. Good.
I'm glad.
Ira, what are you trying to say over there?
He's just having a good time with this.
This is wonderful. Well, you two finally, I was waiting to the point where the two of you disagree.
We didn't disagree. We had to better understand our agreement.
Right.
See, it's not a disconnection, it's a connection. We have to better understand our agreement. Okay.
Well, you both could be right somehow.
Yeah. We're both right all the how. Well, we're probably both.
The only thing we agreed on, the only thing I disagreed on was his wording. I felt was leading to confusion.
My wording was complicated. It could have been simplified, and thank God we have succeeded at simplifying that wording. Okay. So if, like we said, if he made Kiddush on the cup, then he has to go and make a Hamaitzi on the bread that he's going to eat after Kiddush. Why? Why? Because he wasn't able to eat during Kiddush. That you can't talk and what do you call it? And
so that makes it have
speak at the same time, and therefore Kiddush is that Kiddush on wine is considered an interruption between the bread that he had before and the bread that he's going to have later. This is not the same as one who davens in middle of his meal. Very interesting, because based on this, you would think if you stop to daven, you can't eat bread while you're davening. So if I daven in the middle of my Suda, I should have to make another Hamaitzi. Why Lefisha Adayin le Nigmina Sudase? Because in that case, he did not finish his meal. Why? Interesting. Because he was not prohibited from eating in the time that he prayed. Meaning it's not necessarily talking about I guess
you'll see that actually it's the next
right
slide.
he's not talking about the time of go ahead and eat during davening. He's saying that if it reached the time, if the time of davening came, right? If the time
and
of
he decided to get up and daven Shmones,
right, but at that time you weren't prohibited from eating. Whereas Kiddush, as we know, the reason he's stopping now is because Shabbos started and he became obligated in Kiddush, meaning you're now prohibited from eating anything more. Whether you say Kiddush now, whether you don't say Kiddush now, the bottom line is until you do say Kiddush, you cannot eat. Like we said before, you can't even drink water. So automatically you're forced to make Kiddush in order that you should eat. And even if he didn't have enough time in the day to finish the meal and to then daven, that in this case he is obligated to stop his meal and to pray, and he's not allowed to eat more because you're running out of time to daven. But at the same time, the only thing that he's not allowed to do is eat a how do you call it, like substantial meal,
set meal,
or set meal, right? Sitting down to eat as opposed to a snack.
Right.
Shema yimashich ba. Why? Maybe he'll drag it out, like we said before, that by other mitzvahs you have, it's just a matter of you don't sit down and have a full meal, so you shouldn't drag it out, and it'll be average amount of tefillin, will pass the time of davening. But tasting is allowed, a snack. The time that he's and therefore his davening is not considered an interruption of meal, which is very weird to me, because we're talking about challah. Isn't challah the very definition of achilas keva?
What are you talking about?
Eating bread, isn't that the very definition of achilas keva?
Yeah, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying
he's not even allowed to taste anything.
In general, no. He's showing the difference between. Remember, we said
I understand.
By tefillah you can snack. By kiddush you can't even have water.
Okay, I
get
that's
what he's bringing out. He's bringing out what he brought before, that there's different weights going on.
I know, but at the same time, how it's you can't snack on bread. Bread is achilas keva.
I understand. I don't think he's trying to bring up that point.
I understand that he's not. That's not the point he's bringing necessarily.
It's not a hefsek. That's all.
Okay, because he's saying because you can taste something. But in theory that's still a hefsek to challah, because challah is not one of those things that you're allowed to taste.
Yeah, but it's not integral about the challah. It's just that challah is something that he might be drawn to continue a meal.
By extension, you would have to say that, in other words, that he's able to, in other words, there he's not able to. In that case, he's allowed to eat, just not achilas keva. But in this case, there is no other way to eat challah. Anyway, it's just I
guess we have to have a better understanding of what constitutes a hefsek, and that's what this comes down to. What is a hefsek or not? And what he's saying is that if you're allowed to eat something, then that means you could eat anything. It's not real eating. Is not that Shemona Esrei is not something that makes a hefsek in your meal, because bechlal you can eat when it comes to davening, the zman of davening, even a zman where the zman is about to come up, you're allowed to eat something, maybe not this, but something else. We only just don't. Meaning fine. You're allowed to eat. He's drawing differentiation. He's drawing differentiation between eating it all and eating this thing specifically. I think this will help you, because basically the way that Allah comes across is, ideally you would even be allowed to eat challah. The only problem is that, okay, it might lead to something else. That's a big difference than saying you're not allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat.
Right there, your mamish not allowed to eat because
ideally,
of the obligation. In this case, we're just
Yeah.
worried that
You're
you're
allowed to eat.
it's not
And even
right.
challah,
Okay,
you should eat.
fine.
Okay, because
Okay,
it's
so
challah,
so
because
that's
Knesset-
differentiation.
So
So
I'm saying
that's the valid
that's more.
differentiation.
So
Why?
that shows
Because
more.
it's not really
Right,
it's not really that there's a straight up isser because you now have this Torah obligation. You have an isser to eat challah, but rather it was a fence that they set so that you shouldn't come to forget. Okay, that I'll
which is maybe why if someone is allowed to wash during Benish Mashas.
I'll buy that.
And you're not supposed to supposed to like call them
because it's
chastise them
Fine.
because okay, it's not
I'll
a big
buy
deal.
that.
Like
I'll buy that.
But anyway, okay.
I buy it.
Okay,
I'll buy it. I'll
fine.
PayPal you
Good
later.
enough. Good enough. Good enough.
I'll buy
All
it
right.
too.
Yeah, the
right.
and more so furthermore another reason why that case of davening is different. Because there it was not prohibited from him the eating because the time of davening came and then he's going back to his original thing he was doing. Right? Aval kan nasa olav achila kadeshi akidish lefnei achila v'lo lachareh k'meish yizbar. Here it's being prohibited on him eating so that the kiddush should specifically be before eating. Over there, the davening, it's not that he's stopping to daven because his davening has to be before eating. There's this separate thing that he has to daven. In this case, and then he goes back to what he was doing. In this case, the whole point that he can't eat is because the kiddush has to be before the eating and not after it, as has been explained. In Canaan, kiddush mechalik shtei achilis. So therefore, the kiddush separates these two meals: the one that's before it, and then the one that's after it, because now you have to have a meal after kiddush. That eating after. Once you made the kiddush, you're not. It's not a continuation of the same meal. Again, where on the other hand, the reason it's different by the bread is because I'm making the kiddush on the said bread. So therefore, my hamaitzi, as long as they haven't made kiddush yet, my hamaitzi is still connected to the original hamaitzi. In other words, it's not the bracha that. For example, it's not even the hagafen that separates. It's the kiddush. It's the actual kiddush that separates. But in the other case, since the actual kiddush is on the bread, it creates a bridge, so to speak. Whereas if the kiddush is not on the bread, now you have the meal before and you have the meal that's after kiddush. Avol kan, however, here kiddush, immediately when the time of kiddush has arrived, neser alva filatim balma. It is he's going back to continuing from before that parentheses. Here that the time of kiddush came, the he's not even allowed to taste. And it is automatically made like he finished his meal. Amiras kiddush is an interruption. He's not able to eat anything. And he said it, so he's saying kiddush after the completion of his meal. Your meal is finished because you have to make kiddush now. You can't continue that meal.
You know what? This just gave me another possible answer to your question. So I know,
Let's hear it.
But
Let's
the fact
hear
is, continuing a meal, hamaitzi, like even for needing to being able to continue eating bread, you're supposed to eat bread throughout, but you can eat other things to continue your suda, your meal.
Right. So the bread the bread doesn't make a hefsek. Why? Because I need it for kiddush. So even though she's saying, my obligation for kiddush finishes my meal. Yeah, but my obligation for kiddush can be made on that bread.
Right.
So therefore, I'm allowed to eat. So I'm allowed to
eat
bread. I'm allowed to eat bread. However, I'm allowed to eat bread only if I'm making kiddush on it. You know what I'm saying?
No, not that question. I'm saying with regards to tefillah and washing is not, you can interrupt and not have to, and that's not a hefsek because I'm not interrupting a meal because I could eat other things that could, even if I'm not allowed to eat bread, I could eat other things. I could eat crackers. I could eat mezainis. I could eat other food stuffs, snack stuff and that's not considered a hefsek in my meal.
No, but
It continues my
I like
hamaitzi.
your first one better. Is the fact
It
that
is
because
better,
still,
I think.
even
What
though
I'm
you're
saying
allowed to eat other stuff, but here's the problem. The problem is if I can't eat bread, right? If I can't eat bread, if it's prohibited for me to eat bread, it's automatically a hefsek to the bracha of hamaitzi specifically. Our whole problem here is not about eating; it's
No,
about
hold
the
on.
bracha
That's
of
what I'm saying.
hamaitzi.
It's not. You don't have to make a new hamaitzi if you've been if it's been more than an hour and a half, and you made a hamaitzi an hour and a half ago. But in the meantime, you've been eating your meal, other things that are not hamaitzi. You don't have to suddenly make a new hamaitzi. That wasn't a hefsek.
So you're saying, being that you're
That's what I'm
able to
saying.
continue this
Because the
seuda
other
in some
things
way,
that you
shape, or
are
form.
allowed to eat when
Okay.
it comes to
All right, I'll
tefillah,
buy
you're
that. I'll
allowed to
buy
eat
that
snacks. So
too.
that's so I'm saying. So this brought that out that more. But by kiddush, you can't even have water. There's
Right, you can't have
nothing you can do
nothing.
to continue your meal. That means
Yeah,
it
no,
ended.
but based on that, you can in theory say, but the wine that I had is what do you call it? Is also a continuation of said seuda. I'm allowed to have wine.
Right.
So that's
there's
more
something about
shvach. I
making
like the
kiddush
first.
over wine.
I like
Right.
the first one better. I'll pay more for the
It's-
first one than the second one.
Right. I think in general there's something about the kiddush of wine that interrupts somehow. I don't know that's why the wine
No,
works
it's not.
that way.
It's
I think
not.
that's
It's
a
not.
different
It's
thing.
it's not so much that the kiddush on the wine is mafsik. It's that kiddush itself is mafsik. In other words, it's not the Beir Pi Hagafen that's mafsik, because I can make let's say I can make in theory a Hagafen in the middle of what he called, but it's not, it's the kiddush itself that makes the hefsik, because while I'm making kiddush, right, I then, and not only that, think about the seder of kiddush. What's the next thing I have to do after kiddush? I'm not allowed to go and eat a piece of bread after I made kiddush. I have to drink the wine. In the case of the bread, however, the kiddush is on the bread, which acts as a sort of bridge, because what's the thing I'm going to eat for kiddush? Is the bread. So the bread acts as a bridge, whereas the wine creates a hefsek. Not mitzad the wine itself, but mitzad the kiddush is creating a hefsek. But and there's no bread to act as a bridge. There's no the bread doesn't act as a bridge in this case, so to speak. Something out there of that.
Okay, so by kiddush though, even the
snacks. And I think as he goes through this, he clears it, and it's like he's sifting the flour here. But the wine of kiddush, wait a second, if that's the case, so how can I drink the wine after kiddush? Right? So why? In other words, why doesn't it do the same thing to the Beir Pi Hagafen I made before? Right? Because the time of its bracha of Hagafen is before the kiddush. And so there's at the time when it comes and I'm supposed to make the Hagafen, there was still no hefsek at that point. And now I made it. And now I used the other Hagafen, and now I'm saying kiddush. But fine, I'm making kiddush on the wine, so there's no hefsek. And the same thing would apply to challah. That if I'm making the kiddush on the challah, so there's no hefsek. Why? Because the time of the bracha of hamaitzi, when I would be required to make a bracha during the kiddush, would be before the kiddush interrupted. So therefore, there's still no interruption. And then when I'm making the kiddush, there's no interruption because it's on that bread. On the other hand, when I'm making the kiddush on the wine, so it doesn't create a hefsek for itself, but it creates a hefsek for the bread that came before. So you have to make a new hamaitzi, but not a new hagafen. Yeah. Av afla imrim shetakonas chachamim hu bekiddush v'chol davar hataun keish yivarchu ala birchas hayayin tchila. So even according to those who say that the ordinance of the sages by kiddush and in all things that require a cup first, right? That you make a bracha first on a cup. So I guess kiddush, havdalah,
benching.
What? Benching, bris milah thingy. I don't know. Whatever it is.
The halachim.
Commotion is brought in Siman Kuf Tzadik, like is explained in 190. Me'elas bracha rishon lekiddush commotion me'elas lebirchas hananim. But the first bracha of Kiddush, right, is like helped the same way that it helps for brachas on things you're going to partake pleasure from. That you don't have to go back and make another bracha. Being that at the time that it would be considered the end and the stop of the meal before the prohibition of tasting didn't come yet. It didn't arrive yet, right? And because I didn't say Kiddush yet, and the original bracha that I made has not stopped yet. It's not gone away. It's still in force. And during the time he's making Kiddush, he has in mind that he has a cup in his hand. I'm holding a Kiddush cup in my hand. Or in the case of if he's making Kiddush on bread, I'm holding the bread in my hand making Kiddush. Obviously, my mind and intention is on this wine or bread that I'm making Kiddush on. The amiras hakiddush and the making of the kiddush is for the purpose of drinking this wine, so it's not considered an interruption. Just like any time you make kiddush, because otherwise then you would have to make another hagafen by every kiddush. Why? Because what do you do? Beir pi hagafen, right? And then you say then you make kiddush. So wait a second. So I should have to make another hagafen after. No, because that kiddush is on that wine, just like any kiddush. So here they say the same thing. Since the kiddush is on that wine, I already made it before I reached kiddush. There's no hefsek because I already made a bracha of hagafen. Afterwards, there's no hefsek, just like any other time you make kiddush, because my mind is I'm making kiddush on said wine. Masha'en came to pass. On the other hand, by bread, this is not talking about when you're making kiddush on bread, because if you're making kiddush on bread, it'll be the same thing as by the wine. On the other hand, bread that you're going to eat after you made kiddush on wine, that at the time of saying kiddush, right, it's like before you said it. Because there was a stop and an end of the seudah. The second you made kiddush, you finished that seudah. But during the kiddush, you weren't thinking about the bread, you were thinking about the wine, and therefore it is a hefsek. V'yesh chilkin al zeh, and some argue with this. And they say some say no. That which I wasn't allowed to eat once the kiddush time came, this is not considered the end of the meal. Because he had in mind to continuing after this. And if it was up to him, he would still eat now. But the obligation of kiddush is holding him back. And as soon as he removes this thing that's getting in his way, meaning after he makes kiddush, he's going to go back to his eating. And that opinion says, no, just like davening doesn't stop him, so too kiddush doesn't stop him. Because as far as he's concerned, he would go on eating. But okay, I can't. But I fully intend to. No, let me get this thing out of the way, and I'll continue.
Lamaisa, he's still doing his meal. He's still sitting there eating a meal. Like what?
Right. Like what else? And according to that opinion, the ain't tzarich lachzul barich hamaitzi. You would not go back and make hamaitzi. Meaning, what would you do? You would take your wine. Now let's assume you've now, depending on if you had wine prior to in the seudah or not. So you would either make a hagafen on the wine if you were not drinking wine in this meal. Or if you were drinking wine in this meal, you would not even make a hagafen. You would just take the cup and make a sheikh l'shanu's face with atzabanu, etc. Mekadish Shabbos, drink your wine, and then go back to eating your hamaitzi without making a bracha hamaitzi. And of course, it should be noted that this is not the Ein zu derech Hasidim. This is my
Oh,
own
we're
words.
about to
It could be
say. I think we're
confused
about
out
to,
of the
he
words,
finishes.
right?
But he says
V'safik
why.
brachas lahakil. Oh, good. Let's say it in his words better. The safik brachas lahakil, and whenever there's a question of a bracha, we rule leniently to not say the bracha, right? Which means that even though the Alter Rebbe l'chatchila really he especially if you look at all the explanation he gave, it would seem that he very strongly holds by the original opinion, right? However, being that there are valid opinions to the contrary that you would not make the bracha, and when you're in doubt about making brachas, right, you go to the lenient. So therefore, you would not make the tachlis is you would not make the bracha, not the hagaf and not the hametzi. When we call makim, but and at the same time, call bal nefesh, anybody who's every soul man, every soulful
Master of
good
his soul.
person, not good person.
The way
but,
they-
how do you call it?
The way they translate it here is every conscientious person.
It's so what do you call it? It's so it's so like mainstream.
I think it sums up though what
it's so
the
pop.
concept of Bal Nefesh is. But
It's so
the
pop.
translation is master
Yeah.
of the soul.
Anyways,
Bal Nefesh.
yeah, and anyone who's basically anybody who takes his Yiddishkeit very seriously. He should be careful in the first place. They shouldn't come to this quandary. And he should stop his meal, make benching before the time for kiddush has come. He should make sure to stop the meal and make and bench.
And then you make a new hagafen, you make a new hamaitzi. No shayla.
Right. Okay.
All right. Notes, baby. Whew, okay.
Well, it's a long. It's even before that, it's a long sif. So.
Right. As I was saying. So okay. So we said all the way back at the beginning. He said, because he made a hagafen, so he doesn't have to make another hagafen, and so he doesn't need to make also hagafen on any wine he's going to drink during the meal. Is you see in Talmud Yerushalmi brachas, and you also see in Siman 174 subsection 5, which says if you drank wine before a meal, even if he did so before sitting down to partake of the meal, it is not necessary for him to recite a bracha over the wine he will drink during the meal. It's covered by the bracha of the wine before the meal. The wine of kiddush is associated with the meal. Kiddush may be recited only in the place where you're going to eat the meal. So all authorities agree that the bracha for wine of kiddush also covers the wine consumed during the meal, because it is kiddush makom suda. Even though, like Mendel pointed out, there's this concept that maybe kiddush is its own thing, and the guy doesn't have in mind to have a go for the rest of the meal. But there's no seeming to say that. But bottom line,
everybody agrees that it's
you're making kiddush makom suda. You're making kiddush by the meal, so there seems to be that there is this kind of given intent.
Yeah.
All right, now moving right along, that we went
And
further.
we see the same thing by Shulchan Aruch and Pesach, that you wouldn't make another bracha if you partake of wine during the meal. Rather, it's included in the hagaf you made before. Yeah.
Right, which is on the kais. Yeah. Not even by the kiddush, because by that time it's already been so long that you've had your second cup for, and you made another hagafen because it's been too long, but yet still you're covered by that hagafen. So even more so, and that's not even kiddush, so it's not even kiddush makom suda, but it's still covered because it's connected to this process. The Haggadah, the Seder is one long process, so the hagafen covers the Shulchan Aruch. It's all one thing. Anyway, so the tefillah we said later. We said the someone who davened Shemona Esrei in the middle of the meal, right? So that's not considered interruption to say hamaitzi again, because he's gonna eat afterwards. And he says you should see Siman 178 Sif 7, which states, all authorities agree, however, that one is not required to recite the bracha hamaitzi again if he interrupts his meal to daven, and this ruling applies even if one went to shul to daven, which moving rooms is considered a hefsek usually, right? Like it's actually, that's why actually even with regards to washing for hamaitzi, it's ideal that you wash. So it's problematic actually to be walking through different rooms and you can't even see where you're eating. So moving rooms is definitely a hefsek.
And you see actually in that many houses these days, many from houses are set up in such a way where they have either unless the sink is like right in the kitchen, is right visible from the kitchen, where they they have different things, either making either where there's a window so you can see through into that part
Right.
where there's a washing, or
They'll put a hand washing sink in the dining.
Yeah.
And so, but we're saying that no, even if he gets up and goes to Shul to daven, he left the house, not just the room, but a totally different building down the street, a mile away, whatever it is. But as long as he didn't divert his attention from continuing his meal, if that was always the plan, I'm going to go back and eat.
Right.
So it's okay, even though he's unable to eat anything while davening. Not a reason to deem it as interruption, as we explained, as we got into nice and deep. Okay, so then let's see, those are Markel here. No, another marking, fine. Okay, here we go. So now, since he said, since he's also to even have a snack though by Kiddush, it's different. So it's as if his meal concluded. Now, the two reasons given here are Aleph, that one actually stopped eating because you cannot recite Kiddush and eat at the same time. So it's an actual, I finished eating. Bays, it's that because the time the Kiddush comes, you're not allowed to eat. So those two are actually complementary and reinforce each other. Neither one alone is sufficient to make an obligation for a new bracha. Just because I stopped eating because I can't be saying the words of Kiddush and eating at the same time, that's not good enough. And just the fact that, I'm usher to eat, that's not good enough. It's the fact that both are working together incongruently, or congruently, excuse me. They're helping each other to make this obligation for the bracha. The first reason, and he explains, the first reason is not enough, as evident from the fact that one does not recite the bracha on Maitzi again when you daven in the middle of a meal. The same reason. That's interesting. Our whole discussion,
one
if
of
you
the
just read the
reasons,
note.
not the other.
Right. But the second reason is insufficient. It's evident from the fact that you're not required to make a bracha hagafen again in the instance cited here. You have to make a new hagafen, right?
Right. So that has the second reason, but not the first reason.
So both reasons come together to say, yeah, that's why it needs a new one.
Yeah.
But a parallel can be drawn down to benching. But the Alter Rebbe writes in Siman 190, subsection 1, for the recitation of benching brings about a cessation and a diversion of his attention from what he ate or drank beforehand. Moreover, one cannot eat or drink while saying benching. So yeah. Interesting.
So benching essentially is then makes a de facto interruption.
Right, because it's both interruption and you can't be
and right, and you can't. It has both of the said reasonings, like we said here.
So the Maisa on the hagafen that you make a hagafen on benching, you have to make a new bracha hagafen at the end and a new, of course, a new after bracha.
Right. Now, what's interesting here is that the Alter Rebbe actually has a different psak by benching than he has here, but it's not because he holds differently. It's because in that case, it seems like it's a hakol meidim case that everybody holds that way, and therefore it's not a suffix. In this case, even though he holds it's a hefsek and really should make another bracha, but being that there are opinions with weight that hold that you wouldn't make the bracha, and now you have a doubt, so therefore his final thing is you wouldn't make the bracha, even though he really holds the same way by benching. But by benching, you don't have this doubt of other other opinions against it.
So by the other opinions are from actually also from Siman 190, subsection 4, where those opinions are brought up, and it says that a Abayir Pregafen should be cited before any other bracha over wine. That the Chachamim ordained this. So in that section, the Alter Rebbe writes that our Chachamim ordained that every song, meaning the recitation of a bracha, such as benching after the meals or kiddush, anything that's said over wine should be arranged together with the bracha for wine, for that bracha is the fundamental song designated for wine. This concept, and you see the Kuntres Achron over there in section 272, and the notes over there we'll get to, Bezras Hashem, sometime soon. But it gets into what's this concept of having a shira, and the bracha of hagafen is the greatest shira for wine. So yeah. Then okay, all right. Okay. See, here we go. Yeah. So then, and again, and he finished off that paragraph that that they basically making kiddush is not considered an interruption for a person who just said the bracha ber priagafen earlier in the meal, just as not considered an interruption for any other person who says kiddush over a cup of wine. As explained over there in section 190, subsection 1, this reflects the difference between the saying kiddush and the saying of benching over a cup of wine. In that instance, saying benching is considered the conclusion of one's meal. Even if one recited a bracha on wine during the meal, a second bracha is then required on the cup over which you just benched on at the end of benching. And okay. And yeah, that's it. Oh wait, no, sorry. So we said that a Baal Nefesh, conscientious person, someone who takes ownership over his soul, should be careful not to put himself in such a situation. And on the last day of Yom Tif, the Rebbe would customarily partake of a meal together with the Anash, with the Hasidic community, directly before Shkia, and he would extend it into the night, which, as we know, is the whole, in general, the concept to extend Shabbos and Yom Tif, draw it out, make it last as long as you can. So this is a way of doing that. Now, when the last day of a Yom Tif would fall on a Friday, one person would then spread a cloth over the bread, say Kiddush aloud to enable the entire Kehillah, everybody at the Farbrengen, to then fulfill their obligation of Kiddush. And many would then continue eating and drinking afterwards. The Rebbe himself would not eat or drink anything from that time onward. And in 57, in Tafshin Mendel, 5744, around 1984, the Rebbe discontinued this practice because of the confusion that arose. So I guess you could discontinue the practice, I guess, of what someone covering the challah and making kiddush.
And yeah,
right. I guess that Rebbe would just, after Tafshim Mendal, that Rebbe would just benched, and that would be it. They just end and continue. So
I feel like we have to make a derech halon on this seif. It was a long one.
Right. And Yud Beis is not exactly short either.
Not either, yeah. Okay. So let's see if we can finish Yud Beis before our time is up. And this, all that we said above, is provided that they didn't yet say, bring a cup and let's bench. But if they said like this already, no difference if they said it before or after the time for Kiddush has come. He now must make a Beir Pri HaGofen on the cup of Kiddush, because he removed his mind from the drinking because of benching. And I think this would mean even if he didn't bench, because what happens if Shabbos came? If Shabbos actually came, I don't think you would actually bench. You would go, okay, bring the cup and let's bench. Oh, wait a second. It came the time for, what do you call it? You have to make Kiddush. He would have to make it.
Kiddush comes from, yeah.
But being that they said this, that they proclaimed let's bench, they've announced essentially their intention. It's of meal stop.
They basically finished their meal.
Yeah, we finished. Yeah. However, if he's making kiddush on bread, he still would not have to make a hamaitzi. And so too, even if he made a kiddush on a cup of wine, he doesn't have to make a hamaitzi on the bread that he's going to eat after that. Now, I guess he's going based on his suffix brachas lahakil here, because if it's not according to his suffix brachas lahakil,
continue, because this is something.
Then it would then you would have to either way. But why? Because saying bring a cup and let's bench is not considered a hesach hadas. It's not considered a like removing of intention. But rather only for us. So it's not considered like benching, but however, it is considered as far as the drinking to be and I'm assuming there's going to be a note over here that's going to explain what he says in Siman 179. However, if he already washed his hands, he washed the finger washing that you do before benching. Not only would you have to make a mitzi on bread that you would eat after making kiddush on wine, but even if you're making kiddush on the bread, you would have to make a hamitzi on it. Why? Because once you wash my macharenim, at that point it's already considered an interruption of intention as regards eating as well, not just drinking, as is explained in 179. And even though in the first place it's better that you should not eat or drink anything at all after my machreinim, even though he's going to go and say, he didn't say Birchas HaMazon yet, right? So he's going to go continue and say Birchas HaMazon after that. And after this,
so even if he makes a new bracha on what you eat and drink, and then before benching,
wash again, my machreinim.
Do my machreinim again.
Right. Commission is by the Sham. Let's explain them. We call makim kan yesir teiv. So meaning it generally, like it's explained there, it's better you should not do that. Once you wash my machreinim, you should not eat or drink, even if you're gonna wash my machreinim again. But here, yesir teiv sheikadish miyad v'yechel matachla. In this case, however, it's better that he should drink and should make kiddush right away and eat a little bit after that. So the kiddush should be in the place of the meal of Shabbos that comes after it. That's better than benching right away and then making kiddush. Because if he does it that way, he's going to come into a lot of different debates. Meaning he's going to become entangled in a whole bunch of halachis that are the subject of debate and are very confusing. Some say that he should make up the hagafen on the cup that he benched with, and he should taste a little bit. But then, since I made the hagafen, I should use that hagafen that I benched on to be the hagafen for kiddush. So then, at that point, you just go straight into Asher Kiddush face for Atzabanu, right? Because he already fulfilled his obligation for the hagafen part of it through his cup of benching. And some say some say no, he should not drink anything from the Birchas HaMazon because he does not make kiddush yet. How are you going to drink from it? And therefore, don't make the hagafen, bench on the cup, but don't make the hagafen after that. But rather, you set the cup of Birchas HaMazon down to take a new cup and make kiddush on it and drink from the cup of kiddush, and then go back and drink the cup from benching. You can see it's getting complicated already. And then he also will taste from this cup. And it's impossible for him to there's nothing you can do to resolve both of these opinions and do it in a way that agrees with both opinions. That he will make kiddush on the same cup that he said Birchas HaMazon. So you might think, wait a second, I have an idea. I'll make Birchas HaMazon, right? I'll make a Beir Pri Hagafen, and then I'll just holding the same Birchas HaMazon cup. I'll continue with the kiddush on the same cup. Nope, you can't do that. Why? Because Birchas HaMazon is a holiness unto itself. And kiddush is a mitzvah by itself. The ein and base kiddush is al case achas, and you don't do two mitzvahs on one cup. right? This is why, for example, that's why by Sheva brachas you have 2 cups. One is the benching cup, and one is the Sheva brachas cup. You don't do it on the same cup. You don't mix the two mitzvahs together. That you don't make mitzvahs into packages. You don't package them up. You give each mitzvah its due. However, if you are, let's say you're not making birchas hamazon on a cup, let's say you're not benching on a cup, right? For example, you're by yourself, and therefore you wouldn't be required to make birchas hamazon on a cup. Mikol makim im yekadish miyod acher birchas hamazon. Still, if you make kiddush right away after birchas hamazon, yish emrim she'eni yetzi dei chayvasi, that some say that he does not fulfill his obligation. Besides, if he will go and eat again right away. Why? Because the what you ate before, you benched on already. So that's not part of your suda. So now you're making kiddush and has to have a suda after it, not the suda before it, right? So kiddush the Shabbos of that because you require that the kiddush should be in the place of the meal, the Shabbos meal after it. So if that's the case, the blessing on birchas hamazon was a bracha in vain. Because he could have done the kiddush, like we said before, continued the meal, and then said the benching for the whole thing. So now you just said a benching that wasn't necessary. And even though some say that you don't have to eat again, that according to some opinions, you could be the evid, meaning if it already happened, you could rely on the seuda from before that as the seuda, if you make the kiddush immediately after it. So this is kiddush in a place of seuda, that they hold that this is kiddush in a place of a meal, even though it was a weekday meal. However, in order to be careful of your first opinion, you have to be careful not to do this.
You're going to be on tonight?
Tonight, no, nothing tonight, because there's a different shear that we have to be in tonight.
Okay, tomorrow morning.
God willing.
All right.
Instead, the last paragraph. Let's finish this.
So, Ella, rather, even though if he already was, so that's why he's saying, even if you already washed my machreinim, don't go ahead and bench and then make kiddush, because you're going to enter into all these above said complications. So rather, what should you do? Like I said before, even though you already washed my machreinim, yivres mapa v'kadish, cover the bread and make kiddush, v'yachsav v'yechel ma'at, and then go ahead and continue and eat a little bit, so that the kiddush will be in the place where there is a Shabbos meal after it. After, now that you've eaten a little bit again, now go wash my machreinim again and make birchas hamazon on both meals, the meal that was before and a little bit of meal that was after. The kosher kain, and certainly if he did not wash my machreinim yet, right? I imagine he's talking about my machreinim. Certainly, if you did not wash my machreinim yet, you should for sure do this. Even if he finished his meal already when it was still day, but he did not have time to bench until it came kiddush time. So he should make sure, which is why, again, when you go back to the Baal Nefesh thing, make sure you finish your meal beforehand. The truth is, in other places, we see that you're not even supposed to eat a full meal. It's better, really, somebody who wants to be careful, also because you want to leave an appetite for Shabbos, you really shouldn't eat a meal after a certain time. There's actually a specific time after which you would not eat a full meal on Friday. But let's say for whatever reason you did, or whatever, or let's say a bris, or there's certain cases when it would be and then the Moil wasn't able to get into town until after this time. So and there was traffic on the I-95 in Philly because it collapsed the place. Fine. So what would you do? You would in this case just make sure that you're leaving enough time not only to eat but also to bench before or in the case of a bris, also to make your harachmans and everything. Leave enough time that you can do this before Shabbos comes in. Notes.
Okay, so going back to when it says if you take make kiddush over hamaitzi, don't have to say another bracha hamaitzi. So now, as he says, bring the cup and let us benching. It's not an interruption. It's not a hefsek with regards to eating. Only with regards to drinking, as we say in Siman 179, subsections 1, 2, and 4. So brings in the note. Although there are authorities who maintain that such a statement is a sign that one diverted his attention from eating, prevailing view is that when one sits down to a meal, it's common to linger and be drawn from one course to another. Principle applies with regards to eating, but not with regards to drinking. That's why there's this chiluk between eating and drinking, because just the nature of how people eat. They go from course to course, food types to food types with drinking.
Food,
They
drinking
stop.
usually.
They're drinking. Basically, you drink throughout a meal. So if you stop drinking, you're stopping. You're stopping.
Right.
That's it. It's a full stop. If you stop eating, that's normal to do
Right.
in a
Okay.
meal.
And now, guys, here's the classic Shabbos meal, right? Like, okay, oh, that was good. Well, wait, that was just the appetizer. Now comes the soup, and yeah.
Okay. So then later it says, "So my machreinim is a total diversion of attention with regards to eating, as stated in that source, which is 179, subsection 5. As stated there, since one washed my machreinim, he's considered to have diverted his attention from eating, and whenever one diverts his attention from eating, he's required to wash natilas yadayim before saying hamaitzi and to begin again. This does not apply according to authorities who require that one would say hamaitzi after kiddush. For in that instance, he didn't divert his attention from eating; it's just he was forbidden to eat because of making kiddush, right? Now the later it says basically, then the Alter Rebbe continues, and then later says that you should say kiddush immediately, eat a little afterwards, so the kiddush will have been said in place of the Shabbos meal which follows it, Makim Suda basically, rather than to bench right away and then say kiddush afterwards. And the rationale is that way you enter by doing so, you will enter an area where there are many different halachik differences in opinions. So the Alter Rebbe, as the Alter Rebbe then goes on and explains, it's preferable to bench over a cup of wine, but there are many questions regarding to what should be done. For if one partakes of that cup over which you benched, he'll be drinking before kiddush, so it caused problems. So that's what the Alter Rebbe is trying to. It brings out a way to circumvent all that.
Right.
And then later on, we say that other authorities maintain you should not taste the cup of wine over you benched at all, since you didn't say kiddush. And there's still an advantage though to bench over that cup of wine, even if you didn't drink from it. And this was the Rebbe's practice when he was bench in said instances, as we brought up in the note 59, like by the Fabrengen and such. With regards to differences in Abdallah, we'll see by Hilchos Abdallah and the Kodesh Achron in Siman 299, Sifim 6 and 7. Like we said though, yeah, we don't want to two different statements of benching and kiddush over the same cup. We don't bundle mitzvahs, as you say in brachas and brachas 49a and psachim 102b, which emphasize that you don't bundle together separate mitzvahs and perform them together as one.
How did Rebbe do Keish L'Bracha Taka? On a separate cup, he would make the Havdalah and then mix them, or what was the?
What do you mean? How would he do Keish L'Bracha?
Because the whole thing wasn't Havdalah. The whole thing Keish L'Bracha was that it was two brachas. With the benching was done on the cup on there was the benching and then Havdalah, and that's why Matzah Yom Tov was
that's exactly what the note said. We're going to talk about this later.
What?
Exactly what the note said with regards to Havdalah. We'll discuss that later. That's different.
Okay, good.
Havdalah is different.
Come to that part. That'll be the
not
time
only that, but yeah, in general,
Havdalah Yom Tov too. It's not Havdalah Shabbos. It's a different Havdalah. So.
No, but even in Havdalah Shabbos, if you're benching late Shalosh Shuddis, you're supposed to save. You don't make a bracha agaf. You still bench over a kais, but you're supposed you save that cup for Havdalah. That's what we do. Lamaisa, like that's how we do it. Yeah. Havdalah is different. Okay, so in his Kunshas Achron, note number 4, The Alter Rebbe focuses on the statement in the main text. Oh, so this is sorry, forgot to say. So this is on. We say when accordingly saying benching would have been an unnecessary bracha. Basically, if a person eats alone and then he benches without a kais, but then he's going to say kiddush right after benching. So there are those that say he doesn't fulfill his obligation unless he eats again right after kiddush, so
In
that
which
kiddush will
case,
have been said b'makim suda.
Now he's required to bench again.
Yeah. So according then that other benching though would be seemingly a
benching
bracha
means, yeah.
levatala. So the Kutus Achron and Alter Rebbe focus on the fact that saying benching for the first meal would seem to be a bracha levatala. So the brachas are necessary. Since the brachas are necessary, it's forbidden to say it. Similar to saying God's name in vain, right? So he explains the concept comes from the Mechaber's alteration of the wording of the Tur when he says this halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, or Chaim 271 above. We brought up the Tur states it in a way of there is no need to bench with regards to the first meal. The Mechaber writes one does not bench, implying you're forbidden. Not that there's no need, you're not allowed to. So this explanation also clarifies why the main text, based on the wording of the Ramah, speaks of in an area where there are many halachic differences of opinion. That's from the Ramah, that's from the Chaber. So, because there are two fundamental issues over which there are differences of opinion among the Rishonim. And they are, Aleph, whether or not one should drink the cup of wine over which benching was recited, and Beis, whether one should recite benching even without a cup of wine. And so the Alter Rebbe seems to go like the Mechaber, as opposed to the Tur, which is that sorry. It's a bracha levatala and it's a problem. So
Right, or in either case, being that there is even if we were to say that he didn't go according to that, but there being that there's opinions that it would be a bracha levatala, we'd want to avoid it either way.
Right. So the Alter was saying, even if he didn't side that way, but still suffix bracha levatala, there's seemingly a doubt suffix. So the next note